Hey everybody, I just want to go over the um, review for the level 3. Want to make sure that people are clear as to what they need to include for each of those. We'll start out with the pair deck, and if we have time, we'll go over to the worksheet. Um, but when we get into here, remember to transfer or transform. If we're transferring, it's movement from one place to another, but staying in the same form. So like this would be a gas, which would be CO2, going over to a gas, which would be CO2. Okay, an example of this would be diffusion. Okay, um, and then if it's transforming, or another way would be solid to solid. If it was glucose to glucose, that would be where one animal was eating another, or the animal was eating a plant. That'd be consumption. But uh, to transform, that would be like going from a gas, which is CO2, into a solid, which would be like glucose. Okay, so this would be an example of uh, photosynthesis. The reverse of that would be glucose into CO2. That would be respiration done by either the plant or the animal. Remember, there are the four major spheres, okay, with the major sinks. Air, you're stuck in the atmosphere unless you run into liquid water or run into a plant and get captured for photosynthesis. Fossil fuels, you're buried underneath the ground and you're stuck there unless somebody digs you up um, and burns you. The trees, you're in the tree. Okay, the tree's going to take you in, build you into its body parts, and you're stuck there unless that tree dies and decomposes or catches on fire. And then finally, oceans. The only way out of the ocean is through diffusion. Okay, and uh, the other way you can get out, there's actually two ways. You could go into the biosphere, so you either have to run into a plant in the water, like an aquatic plant, and get captured to get into the biosphere, or you diffuse through the surface of the water. But most of the oceans are so deep that light cannot reach um, the bottom, and so it's only in this thin little layer at the top where plants are able to grow, and the you have to be on the very surface in order to do diffusion. So if you're just 50 feet down, you're probably too deep to run into plants, or definitely too deep to diffuse out of the surface. So we've got all of our processes. Okay, this photosynthesis, obviously plants, and that's going to be atmo to bio. Respiration is going to be bio to atmo, whether it's plants or animals. Diffusion, you're going to see atmo to hydro or hydro to atmo. Decomposition, this is kind of a hard one to determine, uh, but generally it's bio to atmo, or if it's been part of the soil, um, then it would be geo to atmo. And then finally, the combustion. Obviously, if it's burning a living plant or burning a tree, it's going to be bio to atmo. If it's burning fossil fuels, it's going to be geo to atmo. So that brings us to our first questions. There's your example. Statement below, when a plant grows. So we need to address this in terms of spheres and processes and balance of carbon. So the first thing we want to look at when you're writing this is what kind of spheres are we talking about? So when a plant grows, and the important thing is grows. So in order for a plant to grow, it has to take atmo CO2 and turn it into solid glucose. Okay, and that's going to be in the biosphere, right? And again, C6H12O6, don't need to know anything about it except it's a big group compared to this small group, and that's going to be a transformation. So photosynthesis is the process. Okay, process is going to be photosynthesis. Okay, so we need to look at it in spheres. We need to look at it as the process. We need to mention the process. Okay, what's actually happening there is that the carbon from the atmosphere is being captured and going into the glucose. But how does a plant grow? Because if a plant uses all that glucose through respiration, it will be released, right? So the plant makes more glucose than its cells need to stay alive. Of course, that would be through respiration. Okay. But the excess carbon which is the glucose, to build new structures or cells of the plant. And these new structures, which we can call growth, okay, will increase carbon found in the biosphere and decrease in the CO2 found in the atmosphere. Okay, so excess carbon or glucose produced by photosynthesis, okay, is used to build new structures or cells of the plant. These new structures and cells, okay, or growth, increases the carbon that's being found in the biosphere and decreasing the carbon that's found in the atmosphere. Okay, so those are the things that we want to make sure, and we double check always. We looked at the balance of carbon. We talked about it being balanced still because it's moving it from here to there. Talked about the processes, and we talked about the spheres involved. Okay, next one there. How about when a fossil fuel is burned? When a fossil fuel is burned, okay, we had a carbon sink. In the geosphere, stored carbon for millions of years, right? And when we burn it, we're going to be releasing, okay, into the atmosphere. So that took care of our spheres. Now we got to look at the processes, right? You need to talk about the process. So combustion of fossil fuels. Again, if you want to give examples of coal, oil, natural gas, be great. Okay. Fuel is going to mix with the oxygen, okay, releasing it as CO2, H2O plus energy. We talked about that in terms of this is just the simple formula of something being on fire, right? Important thing to discuss is the fuel was part of the geosphere and the CO2 again, we're kind of recapping up here, is part of the atmosphere. And we need to talk about the balance of carbon, right? So geosphere is releasing carbon into the atmosphere when burned. And this is adding additional CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. Okay, it's adding additional greenhouse gas Okay, I shouldn't have even mentioned that greenhouse gas. It's just adding additional carbon to the atmosphere. I started going off on that greenhouse gas tangent there because on the worksheet we also had to mention temperature. So if greenhouse gas goes up, the greenhouse effect goes up, which causes temp to go up, right? And so on the worksheet, when it talks about temperature, if greenhouse gases go down, greenhouse effect goes down, the temperature will go down. Okay, so I want to jump over to this worksheet that was out real quick, just to go over these. We'll answer the 3 questions at the top and make sure that when you guys write your paragraph, double check that you're using all of your different vocabulary. So more transportation of goods. Well, more transportation of goods. We are the biosphere. Okay, the biosphere, there's areas that do not have what they need, okay, in order to survive. So we have to transport food, water, goods that are necessary for life. So the transportation always requires burning of fossil fuels because it always requires a plane, train, automobile, giant shipping container ship. So the more we move the goods, the more carbon dioxide will be released by burning fossil fuels, which is transforming from the fuel into and the geosphere, sorry, into the atmosphere. And that is going to increase the greenhouse gas because of carbon, CO2 will increase, which increases the greenhouse effect, which that increases the temperature. The spheres that were involved, again, we talked about geosphere in the fossil fuels. The process would have been combustion, and the movement would be into the atmosphere. And again, that is a transformation because it's going from the fuel molecule into the CO2 molecule. Looking at the next one, cutting down a natural forest is going to be the carbon uptake of the plants is going to be stopped. So those trees are no longer taking carbon in. And once they're dead, they're chopped down, they're either going to be decomposed or catch on fire, which is going to release carbon into the atmosphere, and we reduce the intake. So we're going to see the increase of atmospheric carbon dioxide from the biosphere. So it's going from biosphere into atmosphere, and that's going to cause more greenhouse gas, which causes more greenhouse effect, which causes an increase in temperature. And the very last one, how does this switching to non-renewables? Well, if we switch to non-renewable resources, it actually won't decrease the temperature, okay, because it's going to be going and stop